Well, the virus has now killed more than 100 people in China, and new cases have been confirmed around the world.
So you don't want to frighten the American public.
France and South Korea have also got evacuation plans.
But you need to prepare for and assume
strongly warning Americans to avoid all non-essential travel to China.
That this is going to be a real serious problem.
France, Australia, Canada, the US, Singapore, Cambodia, Vietnam, the list goes on.
Health officials are investigating more than 100 possible cases in the US.
Germany, a man has contracted the virus.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
Japan, where a bus driver contracted the virus.
Coronavirus has killed more than 100 people there and infected more than 4,500.
We have to prepare for the worst, always, because if you don't and the worst happens.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome to War Room Pandemic on the John Fredericks Radio Network, FM 99.1, 103.9 in Chicago, on America's Voice.news, the streaming platform of the Trump Revolution that is now Channel Dish 219. And we want to thank the entire team out there in Colorado for helping us co-produce all the shows, and particularly these specials that get a little tough sometimes. We're bringing people throughout the world on here. Also Newsmax TV now in 70 million homes. And throughout the world on Lexus.org. Also IRRS, and of course G News, G Media, and Mandarin later in the day. I want to thank all the international audience that listens in. Hashtag War Room Pandemic. You folks are lighting things up and getting more information to us every day. Remember, we're building a community here that can stand up for freedom and democracy throughout the known world. Okay, this is Descent into Hell, Part 7. Jack, you've got some a thought about what we just heard in the last hour from Jack Lung, one of the leaders of the insurgency.
For all of our listeners out there who might have been doubting us talking about old 100 names being the deplorables, when you have one of the frontline protesters of the freedom movement in Hong Kong quoting Red Dawn from the 1980s, and he's seen it half a dozen times, people, our listeners, you know that you are on the same team.
No, that's Lao Beijing. That binds. And hey, he didn't say OK Boomer. That's an OK Boomer film. Interesting story. My partner, Bo Flynn, years ago, with Jeff Quatnitz and a team of us, had this management company called The Firm, had a production company. Bo eventually spun off and had his own production company. He got the rights and made the remake to Red Dawn that came out, I think, in 2007, 2008. It was years ago. No, it must have been, I think I was running Breitbart at the time, so it must have been after 2012. Did the remake, and he's getting ready to release the film, and they made him pull it from distribution and recut it because it had CCP. It was Chi-Coms. They made him recut it and make them North Koreans. They would not put it in theaters because of the blowback. This is, this cultural aspect of it. We had Chris Fenton on the show on Friday. I'm a film producer. The CCP, they're everywhere. And you see with Biden, Biden has been their big cheerleader for years and years and years. Tomorrow night on WABC at 7 o'clock, we're going to have actually a special about the geopolitics of 2020 that Dave Ramaswamy, Jack Posobiec, Raheem Kassan, and myself are going to get into and try to structure that. But I want to go back. We've got so many voices of Hong Kong we're going to get in here. We got Wong going to come on next. We got Doctor Who. So many of these real fighters. I want to get to. I want to go back. We got this very special thing that one of the our listeners and viewers overseas got to us in the middle of the show. So can you show us this tape that AVN was so good about putting up? We're going to play the tape.
Mr. President, I want to thank my friend Jimmy Lai for producing and delivering this YouTube letter to you. On behalf of all the free citizens of Hong Kong, the video you're watching now is showing the little-known leaders of the Hong Kong's heroic freedom movement for the last 12 months. These teenagers are mainly high school and college kids. They are fighting to make Hong Kong a home of freedom, democracy, and rule of law, no different from the founding fathers of the United States of America. 9,000 of them were arrested, all of them beaten, some raped and murdered, and all of them are waiting to be prosecuted. They will not be able to finish their education and will never land a decent job in Hong Kong. Unfortunately, out of the 1.4 billion Chinese, only these few thousand kids have the guts to stand up and fight and sacrifice for the universal value held by the free world.
The universal values held by the free world related back to our founding fathers. He was clearly choked up at the end. This is that generation that made the deal with the CCP at the behest of the British. Right, it was really a Sino-British deal signed off by the United States. And I was in Hong Kong back in those days. I started going to Hong Kong back in the 70s as a naval officer. It was hugely controversial, but it was essentially the West was going to guarantee that this was going to work, that Hong Kongers are going to remain free and democratic. And you've seen what happened. We're so fascinated and honored to have Jack Leung in the first hour. And this is what we want to continue to show American people. This is what Donald Trump, when Donald Trump said nothing is inevitable, this is what he meant. It's human agency and human action that makes the difference. Even if you're in these huge historical moments, and we're in a huge historical moment, you can feel it at home. It's one of the reasons you watch this show. It's the reason you go in the hashtag war and pandemic. It's one of the reasons that you're engaged. You understand like the revolution and like the Civil War and like World War II, the Great Depression, something is happening out there. When you see a president of the United States come into the Rose Garden, flanked by his power players in the cabinet, and throws down on the largest superpower out there besides the United States, you understand things have happened. When you see a tape like that, when Jimmy Lai, who is one of the most respected, he's a billionaire, multi-billionaire, one of the most respected guys in Hong Kong, goes on 60 Minutes and breaks down and cries because he wasn't tough enough. He wasn't smart enough. He didn't have the guts to do it. And they talk about high school and college kids. The range of these kids is from 16 to 22 or 23 years old. And what did the narrator say? There's one of Jimmy Lai's partners, that 9,000 arrested. He chose his words carefully. They have been raped and they've been murdered. Some of these young girls, teenage girls, have been raped when they're arrested by the PLA. They've been murdered. There's a bunch of missing people we don't know where they are. But for universal values, what did he say at the end? Of 1.4 billion Chinese, a couple of thousand. And this is everything in life. Everything in life starts with a couple of, did Jesus Christ not go in the first time by himself down to the water and to a couple of fishermen? Starts with one or two guys. You look throughout history, Plato, Socrates, Admiral Nelson, you look at every movement that's ever started. It's with a handful of people. This started with a couple of thousand high school kids. A couple of thousand high school kids basically stood up to the last totalitarian dictatorship of the 20th century. Remember, what we're doing now is we thought at first we had a short 20th century. From 1914, the guns of August, until 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall. We now understand it wasn't the end of history. That Fukuyama and all the genius conservative historians at Stanford and these other places were just wrong. We weren't going to be a continuation of just easy of liberal values. It was going to become, we've had a tough 30 years. But we realized this is the unfinished work of the 20th century. This is the last of the dictatorships that stand, the last of the fascist, communist dictatorships. And you had a couple of thousand kids. I want to go now to our next guest, Wong. Wong is now a naturalized American citizen. He's from mainland China. And Wong, this is what in our and getting ready for the show that you impressed me so much. You said, hey, I'm not from Hong Kong. I'm from mainland China, and now I'm a citizen of the United States. But this is not about Hong Kong. This is about the CCP and how they operate. Can you explain to our American audience what that means?
All right. So, hey, Mr. Bannon, good to be here. So, before jumping into that question, actually, I just want to express my appreciation for you. So, because actually, we know you have been blasted by the CCP actually on the CCTV for quite a few minutes, right? So, actually, just want you to know that you have we Chinese full respect. So, just want you to know, all right? So,
thanks, Wong. Appreciate it.
Yeah, back to your question. Yeah, I originally actually came from the mainland China, right? So now I live in the United States. Ironically, actually, I used to hold a view, actually, to be against the Hong Kong and the Hong Kong people, and it's sometimes actually against the U.S., right, United States, because the U.S. is always on the top list. Actually, it's a part of the doctrine, right? So now, actually, since after I came to the States, everything changed because actually all the information I used to that I can get here that I never get a chance to touch on when I was back in China, right? Especially actually after following the whistleblower movement under the Mao's course leadership, because all the information provided by Mao actually was just beyond imagination. And I literally just rebuilt myself actually from inside out. But actually it is understandable because actually why I hold such a view back in time, because actually literally all the stuff that I got touch on and all the stuff that I can get from the online are pretty much saying the exactly same thing, like Hong Kong people like ungrateful, and we provide them with food, with the water, and all the necessities, like all kinds of stuff, and with cost next to nothing. It all made sense to me back then, and I fell into the trap. But I changed after I came here. So now, actually, about 10 years has already passed. I have been here for long. So now, just days ago, when I tried to talk to my friends back in China, they still live in mainland China, right? So I found a really interesting phenomenon, because some of the people I talked to actually, I still have no idea what's going on in Hong Kong. And some of the others actually, they kind of have an idea what's going on in Hong Kong. But, actually when we talked, I found out that all the information they obtained are just fake, not true. And, some others simply just refuse to talk about it because they're worried. I mean, what if they're going to bust it, right? What is going to happen to their families? So I understand that part. So this is really what's going on in China. So a lot of people are still left in the dark. So this is what's going on in mainland China. So just want to give you an example, all right? So just before yeah, go ahead.
But hang on, let me just ask you: is it because the lack of information? Is the firewall? Or are you brainwashed? Why is it that the mainland Chinese people think the Hong Kong people are ungrateful and the American people are bad?
All right. So actually, this is actually what I grew up with this kind of idea in the education system. What I mean there is actually U.S. is always on the top of the list. I mean, even the school teachers actually are talking about this on the daily basis. Pretty much the U.S. people, all the capitalism is in the textbook for the students to hate. And this is how we were raised up. And back to your question, is that because of firewall, the brainwashing? I would say it's actually the combination. So, just to give you an example, we actually Chinese are really heavy on the WeChat and the Weibo, right? And WeChat is pretty much like Twitter here in the United States, but on a much larger scale, right? And they have the 1 billion monthly active users, and Weibo is pretty much the same. So I searched up the Hong Kong, the keyword, in those two platforms. Actually, so many articles popped up. But you will be amazed to see that there's no single article talking about what the real purpose of the Hong Kong movement, what the Hong Kong people are really looking for or fighting for. And you have no appearance in those articles about the 5 demands, not one less. None. I mean, this is amazing. So what about those articles showing up? Those articles are pretty much saying the pro-Beijing tone. What are they talking about is, those Hong Kongers are pretty much just like a bunch of rioters, and they're trying to break away from the mainland China. But for the people from the free world, we all know that's fake. That's totally untrue, right? Because in the 5 demands, there's no such a thing. So.
Hey, Wong, can you just hang on for a second? We're going to bring you back. I want to bring you back right after the break. We're going to take a short commercial break here. We're going to bring Wong back. We've got Dr. Hu. We've got Jacob. We've got a ton of Hong Kongers that are going to join us. Descend into Hell Part 7. It's the crisis in Hong Kong. This crisis was triggered by a group of high school students and college students that would not buckle under the tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party. It's War Room Pandemic. # War Room Pandemic. Go and give us your comments.
Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Descent into Hell Part 7, the crisis in Hong Kong. I want to go back to Wong quickly because we got so many people to get in here. Wong, what did you think of the President of the United States talk in the Rose Garden yesterday? And what help, if any, are people in Hong Kong looking for from the American citizens and other people listening to the show?
All right. So actually, when we talk about the Hong Kong issue, actually, I always explain to the people that the issue for Hong Kong is not only the issue for Hong Kong only. So what I mean here is, so if you look through, actually, the CCP is behind all the disasters, right? So CCP took back the Hong Kong, but refuses to hold its promise. That's why we have the protests going on, right? So CCP is suppressing the people in Tibet. That's why people there want freedom, right? So the CCP is suppressing the free information flow in mainland China. And that's exactly why we have this pandemic, right? So if you look through, CCP is behind all those disasters. And that's why I say, so if we want to help Hong Kong is only the part of the issue. Actually, to save the people in Hong Kong is pretty much the same to save the people in mainland China. So first of all, we have to take down the firewall in mainland China. So second of all, so if you actually, Mr. Bannon, if you ever lived in mainland China, you would know that CCP is all about money. They are all about money. So we should focus on the money side also and the capital side. So what can we do there? So how about we freeze the bank account for the top Chinese officials in the United States? And then to follow the money, and how about we freeze up the CCP state-owned assets in the United States? And, actually, I just read an article. They say that pretty much 80% of the international transactions actually ultimately cleared by using the American financial system. So how about we cut CCP out of the transaction system? I'm not sure if that is the right way to call it, but this can be called the decoupling, right? So I think it's pretty much the same can be done for Hong Kong dollars. So those are the ways that we can do to contain the CCP. So, Mr. Bannon, I remember you talked on your show several times. There are so many noises. We have to look for where the real signal is, right? The true signal, the real signal is the CCP. CCP is the enemy that we are facing. And what do we do? Whatever the tools that we're going to use, we have to keep in mind that we want to take down CCP, and this is our ultimate goal. So I think those just to name a list, those are methods that we can use to help the issue within China and Hong Kong. And also maybe what about delist those stocks the CCP owned in the United States, right? So I think we have pretty much actually quite a few tool sets that we can use.
Wong, I want to thank you very much for joining us. I know it's always a danger. Anytime any Chinese voice comes forward, the CCP wants to go find their families, wants to find everything. So thank you very much for joining us here on Descent into Hell Part 7. Appreciate your voice. Thank you, Wong. We're going to get Jacob is going to be the next one. Before we get to Jacob, this is what's amazing. What he just laid, and here, hey, you heard it from a guy who came from mainland China. The signal and the noise. You got many noises, Mr. Bannon, but one signal. Take down CCP. This is what's so amazing about this movement. If the CCP thinks they're going to break these guys, they got another thing coming. They're prepared to go all in. And here's what's amazing what he just said. Think about the level of sophistication. You've got all the money transactions. You've got their assets. They're all about money. They're not communists. They're dictators. They're all about money. Seize their assets. Seize their bank accounts. Everything he's talking about, and what President Trump was talking about, the free trade, and what Lung said, and all of them, when you meet these guys, they don't mind bringing it down around their heads, and they understand that their futures are gone. That's what's so powerful about these young people. What did they say in the tape? They're never going to be able to get a job. They're never going to be able to finish high school, and they don't care. They understand this is the fight for a universal value, for freedom and democracy. Right there, what he advocated would make his life, would make the life of people in China, mainland China, harder. They don't care because he says that's all noise. The signal is take down CCP, right? That's why this is a historic moment. If you don't think this is 1938, you're kidding yourself. It is 1938. And what you saw with Donald Trump today, you know what? He said, guess what? I'm not going to be Neville Chamberlain, right? I'm not going to be Neville Chamberlain. The West made that mistake in the 1930s. Now we've got a depression on top of a pandemic, on top of an economic inferno, on top of a geopolitical crisis. It's all the 1930s compressed into one period of time. He could take the easy way out. He could take the Biden way out. We try to be very even-handed on this show. We try to go out. We're hardcore partisans. We try to go out of our way to try to balance this. On this one, there's no balance. There's just not. This is globalist versus nationalist. This is Joe Biden is infected, and this is what I do blame the Bernie movement for the following. 2 pillow fights back to back. The pillow fight with Hillary Clinton in 2016 and the pillow fight with Joe Biden. Note to self, please, the Bernie bros and the AOCs, you got to write this down. Write this down. It's a knife fight, not a pillow fight. Okay? You're trying to take control and have power in the most powerful country in the history of mankind. Okay? If you're going to fight, fight. Take a lesson from the high school kids in China. I want that tape played on a roll on our site. I want it just to be on a constant roll. Just take that lesson from people 16 and 17 years old, what they have to show us. It is a direct link, an unbroken chain back to the Patriots of 1775. That's what I kept saying in June of last year. When these kids first started getting tear gas, I said, oh, my Lord, they're Hong Kong kids. All they care about is money. And it turns out they had very deep spiritual values. They had read the philosophy of the founding fathers. On top of that, they had seen Red Dawn. They had both the yin and the yang of American culture, from the sublime to the less sublime. Okay? But they got it and they put it in there, because actually Red Dawn is quite a deep picture film too, if you think about it, what those kids stood for. And now I want to, because of my tirades, we're not going to be able to get to everybody today, but I'm trying to contextualize. What Wong did, I could hug Wong. Mr. Bannon, you say this all the time, many noises, few signals. Okay, Wong, thank you. You're going to be a co-host before too long. Many noises, he's summed up. There are many noises, there are few signals. Here's our signal. Take down CCP. Everything else is just, you're getting off point, including if we got to bring down hell on us financially and economically. What they're saying is that we understand that we're sacrificing our well-being for future generations. That's moral courage. The CCP, when you take the moral high ground like that, remember, war comes in 3 phases. Just let me simplify it. Number 1, you have to take the moral high ground because you have to have people prepared to sacrifice everything for victory. Number 2 is leave a smoking hole where complete unconditional surrender where your opponent is. Number 3, fill up said hole with your stuff, okay, your values. That's Ulysses Grant. I come from the South. Sherman and Grant got the message. Must break the Confederacy. Fill it back up with our stuff. Okay, unconditional surrender. Unconditional surrender in World War II. We're not going to negotiate. Unconditional surrender. That's what this is about. When Donald Trump came in today in the Rose Garden, yesterday in the Rose Garden, and said, I'm not going to be Neville Chamberlain. Okay? Maybe I didn't list out 30 actions, but I listed out enough that are important. Let's bring in now Jacob. Jacob, you're a Hong Konger, Jacob, and I want to tell people, are the Hong Kongers going to back down? Jack Leung said in the last hour they're not, but I want to hear it from your voice. You tell us where right now the Hong Kongers stand as the Chinese Communist Party, as darkness starts to fall on Hong Kong with this National Security Act. Where are you guys?
Sure. Hi, Mr. Bannon. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share what's happening in Hong Kong. And to answer your question, no, we're not backing down. And I'm a Hong Konger, and I'm an active participant in the pro-democracy movement since last year. And I was one of those 9,000 people who got arrested by the police and facing prosecution which could result in imprisonment with the maximum sentences of 10 years. And my cousin, who is a young female med student with a bright future, was also arrested last Sunday. And you must wonder why and how did we get arrested in Hong Kong. But the problem is you don't need to be radical or violent to get arrested in Hong Kong today. You can be arrested by the police just because you're chanting slogans in shopping malls or sticking posters on the streets or even wearing black. And the police aren't just arresting young people. The government in Hong Kong now is literally suppressing everyone who opposes the government. And we have seen more and more professionals, retired teachers, lawyers getting arrested too. So this is the predicament Hong Kongers are facing right now. The CCP is tightening at its grip on Hong Kong, and we all know that. But there is nothing much Hong Kongers could do to resist except taking onto the street to protest, to make our voice heard. But the stick of doing so is getting higher and higher. Not only will we be being brutally suppressed by the police, we will also be facing dire consequences imposed by our legal system. So take me as an example. My life has been seriously disrupted by the trials that I'm going through right now because the court will resist you from traveling and have you obliged to curfew orders. But despite all these challenges we're facing, Hong Kongers have never thought of backing down because we know giving up or surrender is not really an option right now.
Jacob, can you hang for 1 second? I want to keep you over through this commercial break, and I've got some more questions to ask you.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
With over 100 million views and almost 9 million downloads on the podcast, one of the biggest and most important shows internationally throughout the globe. It is War Room Pandemic, where every Saturday we get the voices of the Chinese people. Remember, when we talk about the Chinese Communist Party, they've enslaved the Chinese people. This is all about their freedom, whether that's in Hong Kong, Taiwan, in mainland China, even in the United States. Although they're American citizens, many of the Chinese here have become national, and they're American citizens. And guess what? They're still under the boot in the reach of the Chinese Communist Party. Every time I talk to expatriate Chinese that are here, it is the fear in their voice. They live in a country that's free. They love the United States. They're fabulous citizens, but they will tell you if the Chinese Communist Party finds them being outspoken, they will go arrest their family in mainland China. And these guys, they play hardball the entire time. Want to go back to Jacob right now. Jacob, as someone that's been active participant in this democracy movement, and have really seen it gone from an umbrella movement to now a real insurgency and really standing up to the Chinese Communist Party, what are you looking for? Yesterday in the Rose Garden, President Trump laid out really the firmest thing, although a lot of people are saying it wasn't enough. It was the first time, that President Trump really stood and said, hey, he never said she's my friend in this one, right? This was a very somber, there was gravitas. He had his top advisors around him, Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor, Mike Pompeo, the West Point graduate who's the Secretary of State, Peter Navarro, the Uber hawk over there in the manufacturing. He had some real fire breathers up there. What are the protesters in Hong Kong looking for from the West?
So Hong Kong has always been in the front line of battling the CCP government. So back in 2014, which we call that the Umbrella Revolution, we have been already fighting very hard for democracy in Hong Kong. But the CCP government never really honored their promises. But right now, the battle against CCP in Hong Kong has intensified because the CCP government is trying to impose the national security law in Hong Kong. So this marks the end of the so-called one country, two system. And I really believe that the world should back Hong Kong up, just like how the West supported West Berlin during the Cold War. And I really appreciate what Mr. Trump announced yesterday. So what really worries us due to the new law is that because the CCP government could send their special agents to enforce the laws in Hong Kong, which is outrageous because we never know whether they will adopt someone who they don't like to back to China. So this is really serious. So we really implore the world to stay together and to stand up against the CCP government.
You said something there, Jacob. I wanted, particularly for our audience that remembers this. Many of our audience are great admirers of President Reagan, and particularly the way that President Reagan went against the elite, the foreign policy elites in our country, and really stood up to the Soviets. You just equated Hong Kong with West Berlin. Tell me, what do you mean by that? Because that's kind of shocking. When Americans think of Hong Kong, they think of this capitalist island that it's a capital market that people don't really care about politics that much. And I understand they've seen these protests, but it's making that analogy to West Berlin, I think, would wake up a lot of people in the West who remember all the dark days under communism in Eastern Europe.
Well, because if you are following the Chinese news, you will notice that what the CCP is doing right now is that they're doing what we call wolf warrior diplomacy, wolf war diplomacy. So now they are hoping to divide the pro-democracy camps in the world through infiltration, bribery, or the so-called one belt, one road initiatives. So they have been doing all these things in the past few years. And so I think, I hate to say this, but I think we and as well as the whole world has made a mistake by, letting the CCP go after what they did in 1989, the Tiananmen massacre. So back at that time, the world did try to sanction China for a little bit, but very soon they let them go, and they let the beast out from the cage again. And I know that the world at that time hoped that by letting China join the WTO or other trade organizations in the world, they could become more democratized when their economy takes off. But that never happens. So I think what China is doing is leveraging all these loopholes in the world, and they are trying to export their authoritarian ideology to the whole world. And I think this is not acceptable. So I implore the world to stand with Hong Kong, because it's really time to choose freedom over profits.
One last thing before we let you go, Jacob, and obviously you're incredibly inspiring, as all you young people are there standing up. This summer, Jack Leung in the first hour has said, hey, you're going to see this summer escalation. The Chinese Communist Party, particularly with the new law, think they're going to use sedition and a crackdown on the police to break us, but you're going to see a scaling up in this. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, sadly, I do agree, because with the law being imposed in Hong Kong, I think this allows Chinese to further tighten its grip in Hong Kong. So I like what I've said. They're allowed to send their special agents in Hong Kong. And let me remind the audience about an outrageous incident happened in 2015. So back in 2015, the Chinese government sent their special agents from China and to abduct several Hong Kong booksellers back to China, just because they're selling books that the Chinese government didn't really like. And they were forced to make confession video and threaten not to reveal the truth about the abductions. So these things keep happening in Hong Kong. And with the new law being enacted, I do believe things will get worse in Hong Kong if the international community isn't doing anything to really force China to stop doing this.
Jacob, I want to thank you for joining us. I know it takes a lot of bravery. It takes a lot of bravery what you're doing in the streets, and it takes a lot of bravery to come on the show. So we greatly appreciate it. I want to thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bannon.
I think what the world saw in the last 48 hours, 72 hours, is you're seeing now the victory of these kids for not breaking. High school kids. They didn't break, but they did something that the Richard Haas's in the Wall Street faction and everybody that's kind of said, oh, the Washington Post had this editorial, Haas had this big story out. It has to be graduate. We're concerned. It's what these guys are mocking. I don't want to hear concern anymore. We don't need your concern. We need your engagement if you believe in freedom and democracy, right? Otherwise, inexorably, we're going to be drawn into a kinetic war. We either stop the lessons of history are ironclad in this. You either stop it or it metastasizes, because it's not going to go away. It's very much like the school grounds where you don't stop the bully, it just gets worse and it never gets better. At some point in time, you've got to confront it. You've got to take it on. We're at that moment. I mean, we're at that moment, and you've heard the voices of these kids saying, hey, I could be killed, I could be in prison. You know, this guy's already been arrested. He's one of the 9,000 still up on charges. They're saying, we're not going to break.
And what's also so important, I think it's important for our listeners to understand this. These guys see this as a bigger mission than Hong Kong. In fact, they know that they may not win in Hong Kong, right? But the objective is to free 1.4 billion people and the other 6 billion people who are in line to be enslaved next by this evil empire.
You heard of Thermopylae, right? Come on. There's the exact same. There's an unbroken chain. This is what Pottinger was saying, which the mainstream media, this has told you how corrupt and incompetent and lazy. It's either corruption or laziness. Pottinger comes out and gives a talk exactly about that. Pottinger comes out in perfect Mandarin, which freaked him out. He's the Deputy National Security Advisor, a terrific young man, former Wall Street Journal correspondent in Beijing, left to go into the Marine Corps during the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and go over in military intelligence, where he met General Flynn, it was the very first hire after we won under General Flynn, the very first guy. He's now Deputy National Security Advisor. He gives this talk at the University of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson's University. It was not lost on him what he was doing. The author, or at least the head of the committee for the Declaration of Independence, and Pottinger gives a talk that ties together the ancient philosophical underpinnings of the Judeo-Christian West and ties it to the philosophical underpinnings of 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago of the May 4th movement. The May 4th movement in China is when May 4th, 1911, when they threw off the empire that had ruled them for on and off. I mean, it ruled them continually for 4,000 years or 3,000 years with different ruling families, but threw it off and formed a republic. That sold the bonds that Jana is on, Bianco is on with us, that the Chinese Communist Party stiffed us on, right? Stiffed the deplorables. It all ties together. We're going to connect all the dots. That ties together Thermopylae to what happened in Hong Kong. You don't need to watch some science fiction of the 300. I love it. You don't need to watch these cartoons. You don't need to go watch a cartoon about some, Captain America. And I love all this, but you don't need to go watch a cartoon to look for heroes. You have heroes, and everybody out there in this audience said, "Oh, if it was during the Revolution, I'd be there with the Patriots. If it was during the Civil War, I'd be out there. If it was during World War II, yeah, I'd be fighting Hitler. I'd be the first guy that volunteered. I'd volunteer in 1939, right? I'd be volunteering for the Royal Air Force." Right? I know you guys read history. I would be there. You're here now. And those kids, their victory, and they've already had a huge victory. What the high school kids did led to Donald J. Trump, the 45th president of the United States, in direct lineage, in an unbroken chain, to Ronald Reagan and Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Jackson and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, in an unbroken chain of the greatest republic in mankind's history and the most powerful nation in the history of mankind that has freed more people than any nation in the history of this earth in all 4 billion years. Okay? And these kids and the people that come on the show are in direct as the unbroken chain of Donald J. Trump in that Rose Garden back to the beginning of this republic, and even before the beginning of this republic. In 1775, in those years, 1773, when they were revving it up in Boston and revving it up in Philadelphia and other places throughout the country, that unbroken chain is in Hong Kong today, right? You can't deny it anymore. I tell you who knows this. The Chinese Communist Party knows it. Beijing knows it. They are prepared to walk away. Look what Donald Trump said. We're going to cut your trade status. We're going to delist your companies. We're going to cut you off from capital markets. You're not going to have access to technology. We're going to cut your visas so you can't come here. We're eventually going to freeze your assets. We're going to do it all. And the Chinese Communist Party is telling you, and suddenly says, hey, guess what? We don't care. We can take the hit. You know why? It's more important to us to stop those high school kids in Hong Kong, because the Chinese Communist Party is evil, but it's smart. And they understand the power of those kids not surrendering. They understand if those kids don't surrender, Beijing is going to fall. They understand that. They've got to stop that. The entire regime depends upon that. We're going to take a short commercial break. More voices from Hong Kong in a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
There's a crisis in Hong Kong, but there's also a crisis throughout the world. This pandemic has really triggered an economic inferno and a financial crisis. Remember, in these times, if you're an entrepreneur, you need every tool at your disposal in order to make things turn out the way you want them to turn out. Remember, the single most important thing about an entrepreneur is not just the fact you've got to be bold, and fortune favors boldness, but you have to understand how to mitigate risk. One of the ways to do that, you get NetSuite by Oracle. This is already in 20,000 companies. This is the software package for the entrepreneur, whether your company's $1 million in revenue or $100 million in revenue. Here's what they're offering. Go to our site, netsuite.com/Bannon. It can take you into the 7 things you have to think about right now in this crisis as an entrepreneur, even if you don't get the software. It shows you, it breaks down what you have to do, what you have to think about, whether it's capital asset pricing, whether it's your financial projections, whether it's human resources, e-commerce, all of it. And they tie it together to help you think as an entrepreneur. So remember, our sponsor, NetSuite by Oracle. Jack, you've got an analogy that you've been talking about for a while from Nazi Germany.
Well, I don't know if many of you know the White Rose movement. You probably know of Sophie Scholl, who was a wonderful young college student in Munich who was executed on February 22nd of 1943 for having passed out pamphlets critical of the regime. And her situation reminded me very much of the courage of these Hong Kong students who are out there doing exactly what she did, opposing evil, full well knowing the danger of it. And there are 2 things I want to read that she was quoted as saying. She was only allowed 1 sentence in defense in the court, and the Roland Freiser, the People's Court, which we all know, a terroristic court similar to the CCP's courts. And she said, somebody, after all, had to make a start. What we wrote and said is also believed by many others. They just don't dare express themselves as we did. The next day she was executed. On her way to the gallows, she said this: such a fine sunny day, and I have to go. What does my death matter if through us thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action?
That is a pretty good sum up for the students in Hong Kong, Jack. Fantastic. I want to introduce Dixon Ho now. Dixon, you're a Hong Konger. Let me ask you, the whole deal was supposed to be 1 country, 2 systems. You've been there from the beginning. Where do we stand right now, and what are the Hong Kongers really fighting for, and what are you looking for the West? There's some confusion, I think, in the West of exactly what's going on. Tell us exactly what's going on, and what are you guys looking for?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bannon. Could you hear me?
Yes, sir. Perfect.
Yes. Also, I'm Dixon Ho, an exhibition curator of Hong Kong. It's a very common Hong Konger who are also shocked as well to see my home coming to this stage of chaos. But after all the speakers before me, now I would like to put the issue to a bigger institutional context. To say that the whole thing now is actually should not be that surprised if you think back all the things happening in Hong Kong. Well, because in my view, the one country, 2 systems or the basic law are not reliable from their very beginning. And the reason behind it's simple, that while we Hong Kongers are promised to have all kinds of freedom and rights as any developed big country, there's no punishment on CCP for violating them. There's no mechanism in the basic law on that, nor the joint declaration. The British people simply just sold us to China. So after all, CCP never have any consequences for offending the basic law or destroying the two systems. And that's why it can become more and more aggressive for us. And Hong Kongers, after all, can only humbly wish the CCP to be kind, to voluntarily refrain their power and behave themselves. But how come it is possible, right? I mean, like, we are talking about a regime massacre hundreds of innocent students at Tiananmen Square in 1989. And it is not only about the CCP, actually, right? Like, I mean, like, if you look back to history, like, no dictator does not abuse their power, and no dictator does not corrupt. Otherwise, there won't be revolutions in France back then, or no independent war in America at all. And we don't need democracy and all that modern system to restrict power holders. Well, after, like, what I mean here is the key issue of Hong Kong right now is that we are under the rule of an authoritarian regime. So it is so expected that they abuse their power, infringe our rights and autonomy, and the basic law is doomed to fail. And two systems are also doomed to be destroyed. And Hong Kong now is this present stage of chaos. And the protest now, as like Mr. Bannon just also speak that previously, is the revolution, is the war against dictatorship of our time. And on that note, I also really appreciate that the American government now has started to realize that Hong Kong is no longer autonomy from China, especially with the coming national security law. And I appreciate that the measurements, that the strong action that coming to Hong Kong.
Dixon, thank you very much. We got to jump. We're going to do an extension of this probably next weekend to get with this Hong Kong crisis is not going to go away. We got to get more voices. I want to thank Dixon Ho, one of the Hong Kong residents. I want to thank the bravery for all the Chinese today that came on the show, because there's immense pressure, particularly among their families, that they will be arrested and their families will be arrested and basically turned out. What's going on in Hong Kong is triggering a crisis, a geopolitical crisis throughout the world. Yesterday, you saw in the Rose Garden where the 45th president of the United States, you know what Donald Trump basically did yesterday? He said nothing's inevitable. Human action and human agency are going to make the difference here. He could have taken every different alternative of that, right? Like Neville Chamberlain took. People were all over Trump to go soft, to just say a few things. And some people, and particularly the super hawks, sitting there going, hey, it's not hard enough. We need to throw down. He stood up and he started a process. There was no, she's my friend, she's doing a great job. It was the exact opposite. This is War Room Pandemic. We've been honored to do these shows every Saturday. This is Descent into Hell number 7. Hashtag War Room Pandemic is the way you participate in this community. And believe me, by your participation, you're changing world history. You have had a major impact already. You know why? Because as many of the speakers come on today about CCTV is on me. You know why they're on me? Because of you. They understand the power of the deplorables, and they understand the power of Lai Beijing or 100 names. They do not, under any circumstances, want you two to partner. Okay, we got a special on WABC tomorrow night, and we'll be back on Monday morning at 10. See you then. War Room Pandemic.